Hi, Assalamualaikum. My name is Marazim bin Muhammad Fazi from EH22006M, and I will be presenting on topic 2.1 and 2.2, which are engineering as a profession and also accepting and sharing responsibilities respectively. Moving on to the first subtopic. So the question is, what is a profession? By definition, a profession means that it is a paid occupation, especially one that involves prolonged training and also formal qualification. Take two examples. An individual studies at a certain course at a university and implements the knowledge that he gained into his life. So it basically is something where a person describes themselves on what they do in life. For the second question, how does profession differ from other words such as jobs and also occupation? So both of these phrases, profession and job, are used to describe the role that an individual occupies in a certain company. But there are also some important distinctions. The difference between these two words are a job. It specifically refers to something specific, like a certain specific job or a position, where an occupation refers to a more wider point of view in the industry in where someone works. For example, let's take a hospital. A specific job title that a doctor possesses could be a neurologist, but the more wide point of view of that occupation is a doctor. And also, many people can have the same job title but not the same occupation, just like what I told earlier. We could also take teachers, for example. Teachers are a profession, but there are still many more various types of teachers, such as teachers who specialize in special education, or even chemistry, or even biology, and many more. So even if an occupation is a larger description of what someone does for a livelihood, and a job title is more detailed, the specificity of work title still varies. Someone who works for a newspaper, for example, would call themselves a journalist, and the job title would be an editor. Editor-in-chief, managing editor, and fact-checker are some of the numerous types of editors who can make the job title more precise and into a smaller scale. As simple and as complex as it sounds, it still has a significant difference between these two. So let's say if you're just starting to looking for a job and you want to be open to a variety of opportunities, try searching by occupation. If you need more specific results, try searching for the specific job title that you're looking for, such as marketing manager. So this way you can uncover employment that clearly fit your interests and qualifications by being as descriptive as possible. So from the articles that I've read, it basically goes down to how flexible you are. Let's say if you are really looking into a specific job, then you should search for that specific job title so that it complements your abilities and experience that you have. But if you're a person who's looking for a job in a wide sector, meaning the job that you're looking into is not specific but closely related to your experience and your abilities as an individual, it's best to search for the occupation so that you can pick and choose what suits you the best in that certain sector. Another distinction between profession and job titles is that job titles might reveal your workplace's hierarchy status. As we go into a company as a new person, there should be a hierarchy status where we know who to report to and we know who is above us. Some businesses employ numerals to represent the various levels of a single job title. So what I meant by numerals, someone's work title may be engineer 1 or engineer 2, for example. Even though their occupation is engineer, every one of them is an engineer, but it depends on the hierarchy and numerals to set which levels are they on. Another technique to illustrate hierarchy is to put the job title before the seniority level. Depending on their position in the company hierarchy, a person's job title can be junior account executive or senior account executive, for instance. Current employees and job both benefit from defining the levels for its job title. This is due to companies. They need to establish a hierarchy because it makes it easier for the employees, and it also allows new employees to figure out who they should report to or who they should ask questions when they are lost or curious about something. So it provides a certain level where newcomers, for example, or even people who are experienced and been in the company for a long time, the hierarchy would still be there. So there will always be somebody for us to report to or to ask questions when there is a problem regarding any issue in the company. This hierarchy system also comes in handy when we want to look for a job, because job titles are useful since they can help us to understand whether a position is our entry level or we still require more experience. So when we know that there is a hierarchy in that certain company, because most big companies have a hierarchy and structural organization in that company. So to get to that level, a certain level in the hierarchy, on the top of the hierarchy, for instance, we need to have a lot of experience and knowledge, and we need to be self-developed and always learning something new. So for some fresh grads, it makes it easy for us to filter the jobs that are suitable for us by referring to this hierarchy. So the next topic that we're going to talk about is the salary. So just as we discussed before, the same thing applies to the salary of a certain job title. Bigger positions may give you bigger wages, just as a person's job title provides a wide definition of what they do for a living. So does the salary range. It ranges from big to small, depending on your position in a certain company. So if you search, for example, for a developer's wage range, you probably would find a greater range than if you search for a senior software developer salary range, because it's more specific. So when investigating average salaries prior to the negotiating stage of the hiring process, it's best to try to narrow down the job title as much as possible. So by doing this, it will help you to get a more accurate salary to negotiate with, because when we try to sell ourselves into a company with the abilities that we have, it's best to be specific so that it's easier for you to negotiate your salary with that company, and it will also make it easy for them to filter what your abilities are and expertise are, so that they would pay, so that the negotiation would be fair enough for them to give you a handsome salary based on what you would provide to the company. In my opinion, if you ask me, it all comes down to value. When we're talking about salary, it's what value can you provide to the company in a positive way. And also, we need to keep in mind that the income is also affected by our job location and the firm that we work for. Like I said before, the position. So the salary will range for both locations, and also job titles can be affected by several factors, such as maybe as an engineer, if you work between offshore and onshore, the offshore payment would be higher because of the factor of risk that could endanger us being offshore. And we could also take a business for an example. Let's say that you run a business and you'd like to grow your sales more. So a person comes to you and offers you an option for marketing, and they would do the copywriting, they would do the online marketing, the telemarketing and everything, and they promised that they could double up their sales in just a few months. So let's say, and the payment that they ask for, let's say your company has been straight making sales up to $1 million a month, but you want to double up that amount, becoming 2 million. So this person could do the job, and that's what value that he offers to you. So in return, he will be asking for a 10,000 ringgit payment every month in return of doubling up your company. So that way, it is I'd say a good investment for the company to invest in that particular person to grow the business in terms of sale. Another difference of a job title and also a profession, in terms of task given when you are working, a job title, on the other hand, it frequently includes detailed specifics about the responsibilities you need to be performing on a regular basis as an employee. For example, let's say that you are looking for a job and you are searching online to become a retail associate. So in retail associate, there are a broad list of jobs that are specific for you to choose to. So when you are wanting to become a retail associate, they may come up with a wide of range of tasks, unless that if you be more detailed and you are specifically interested into certain jobs in the retail department where you would like to be a cashier, for example, or stocker, so that would yield more precise results. And also, when a job description lacks duties or tasks, job names also come in handy. It makes it easier. So before applying, look at similar job posts and search results to determine whether the responsibilities appeal to you or they do not complement the person that you are. Moving on to the attributes as a profession, the first attribute is having an advanced expertise. So an individual requires a certain skill that not many possess, and also theoretical knowledge. To get into a profession, it requires intensive formal education, and that person needs to be ahead in development, knowledge, progress, and continuing and updating knowledge. So this would be an advantage to your certain expertise, which are specific and could be useful and beneficial for the company. For instance, a marketing manager needs to be alert on the new ways of marketing a product or service to guide his team in achieving their targeted sales through extensive learning and research, and even through experience. By this way, this manager could lead his team into the latest strategies or tacticals in the market to market the product or service that they are providing to the public. So this way, that certain company will benefit from this specific team, in which in return they would get a larger amount of numbers. So the important question is,
how would the manager guide his team? So, the way that he could guide his team into making more sales is by doing an extra research on the latest and effective ways to market the products, and this is where his skills would come in handy. So as a manager, he should be in a higher position in the hierarchy. So with that amount of experience, he should know what to do. And to me, there are many ways in deciding what's best for the company. And his job is to be the brain of the team in deciding the crucial movements that need to be made for what's best for the team and also the company by increasing revenue and sales. So let's move on to the second attributes as a profession, which is being self-regulated. So by definition, a self-regulated profession means that a profession that governs itself without any external interference. So it means that this profession and this specific sector governs itself without any other external disturbance or interference. So it is well-established bodies are allowed by the public to play a major role by setting standards to the profession, drafting codes of ethics, enforcing the standard of conduct by representing the profession before the public and government. Other than that, self-regulation in all of its forms is an essential component of today's global economy. Self-regulation is also a mechanism that have been employed to oversee industry practices in a variety of areas including healthcare, higher education, fashion, advertising, mining, marine fishing, professional sports, and also nuclear power. Where does self-regulation come in? Well, right now it is used in the private sector to solve a variety of concerns, such as creating industry standards, standard operating procedures, defining and adopting codes of professional ethics, and also ensuring consumer confidence. In other words, self-regulation is also defined as a regulatory procedure in which an industry-level group defines and enforces rules of standards relating to the conduct of firms in the industry, rather than a governmental or firm-level organization. And self-regulation is also used by businesses to reduce consumer risk, build public trust, and battle bad public views. It basically adds to the current laws by adding additional rules to regulate the business activities. So, in response to both the lack government regulation and the danger of heavy government control, industries have embraced self-regulation in their organization. And also, self-regulation is an important tool for managing industrial activities in many sectors. And also it offers several advantages to the customers, producers, and the government, and also the economy as a whole over government regulation. Self-regulation also benefits consumers in a variety of ways. Regulation that is unnecessary or ineffective raises production costs for enterprises without providing any advantages, and these expenses are ultimately passed on to the consumers, making it a burden to them. Because government regulation is designed to address specific problems, it can inadvertently create obstacles to innovation and competitive entry when it imposes standards that only apply to present market actors and behaviors. So for businesses, self-regulation can be more efficient, and these savings are passed on to the consumers. And we are coming to the last attribute of a profession, which is a public good. So, the practice of profession is crucial in giving out perks to the economy and also the community. So, public goods can refer to many professions. It is in a wide range of professions that will benefit to the society and also the community. For example, medicines are used for health, law towards promoting legal rights, and engineering towards safety and technology, and many more sectors. In simpler terms, a public good is a product or service that is made available to all members of societies and economics. Typically, governments administer these services, which are paid for collectively through taxation. Non-rivalrous and also non-excludable are the two basic characteristics that define a public good. Non-rivalrous products do not run out as more people consume them, where non-excludability means that the commodity is available to all citizens. However, there is an issue where the free rider dilemma is a significant issue concerning public goods, because public good is available to everyone in the nation. So regardless of whatever the occupation is, whether they pay for it or not, whether they are paying for the tax or vice versa, individually it is feasible for certain members of society to utilize them despite their refusal to pay them. People who do not pay taxes, for example, are essentially getting a free ride on the income generated by those who do not pay them. Moreover, individual countries will make various judgments about whether products and services should be designated for public goods, and their national budgets will typically reflect this. Many believe, for example, that national defense is a critical public good because it benefits to everyone in the nation. Since national security benefits all residents, to that end, many countries make significant investments in the militaries, using public funds to fund army maintenance, weapon purchases, and research and development. Through an article that I've read, in the United States, for example, the Department of Defense, or DoD, has spent $455.89 billion, which is 45.8% of its total budget of 2022 for the Department of Defense only. From my point of view, it doesn't matter if a group of people in the nation who are getting a free ride due to this, because there is also a high percentage of poverty in every nation, especially in our country. Not everyone has the privilege to generate as much income so that they could pay tax. So it doesn't matter whether they are paying for it or not through taxes by the government. Everyone should have the perks and could benefit from public goods that are already enlisted in the budget of the government. Moving on to the second subtopic of chapter 2, which is sharing and accepting and sharing responsibilities. So responsibility, by definition, it means a sense of responsibility. It begins with an obligation where the core idea of transmitting thoughts into actions revolve. So it basically it depends on that person on what and where he puts his obligation to perform his responsibilities as a human being. And also, engineering, in terms of engineering, ethics consists of responsibilities, rights, and also desirable ideals and personal commitments in engineering. In this chapter, there are many types of responsibilities, so we are going to go into it one by one. So the first one is obligation responsibility, where this is people use their advantage to benefit others, such as clients or the society. And the second one is a blame responsibility. This means that it is a type of responsibility where someone is to blame when something wrong was done. In a more simple terms, For example, we could say that a person who got murdered obviously was killed or hurt by someone else who is responsible for the actions of hurting that victim. The third responsibility is a role responsibility, where this person who occupies a position or supervision in a certain group. This type of responsibility implements both in public and also in the workplace. When someone is given a task in a particular job, he is assigned to complete the task accordingly to what was required based on his role in the company. So that is his responsibility as he is in position of that role. And this type of role could also be applied, for instance, at home as a father who has a family. This father is the one who is responsible, who carries the responsibility for the provision of the basic necessities of the family, such as food, clothes, shelter, and many other things. The fourth type of responsibility is moral responsibility. Moral responsibility is closely related to legal responsibility. But we'll go to the legal responsibility in the next part. So, moral responsibility explains the status of morally worthy praise, blame, reward, or even punishment for a morally reprehensible act or conduct an individual performs. The most easy way to recognize a moral responsibility is when a person does not get punished or rewarded if he commits this type of moral responsibility. In my opinion, this type of responsibility is also important in looking into the traits of the characteristics, the traits and also the characteristics of the human being as a staff at a company, let's say as an employee, or even to the public eye. And this is because every moral act that is done could bring ease to another person's life and could affect people in a good way, in a positive manner. So, for instance, even helping a colleague at work is a good example of having moral responsibilities, as it makes people in a group of work, work together. Thus, this would make it easy in completing a certain task more efficiently in a well-mannered environment. The next type of responsibility is a casual responsibility, as we call it, and this is usually based on the concept of token or causation. So, to explain this type of responsibility, it takes place when a person sometimes are not aware of committing that particular action, and also are sometimes done accidentally. Let's take an example where an individual did something wrong without true intentions, meaning by accident, but still he was the one who did that particular action, so he's the one who is going to take responsibility of what he has done, even if it was done accidentally and he wasn't aware of that. Moving on to the next responsibility is the job responsibility, where this is closely related when you are running a job or a task designed specifically for an employee. Let's say you're an employee. So the job and task designed for you and was brought down to you is to answer calls, phone calls, and emails, and maybe data entry, and even maintaining a file system, where among the responsibilities of providing administrative support to employees and managers through a variety of communication and organization duties. So basically, it's just an action of you doing your job that you are paid to do in the certain company. So the last type of responsibility is what we call as legal responsibility, where it is a specified responsibility imposed on a person to care for or provide for another, including personal culpability as issued by a power of attorney or a court order. The example of legal responsibility and also the difference between moral and legal duty is that a person will not receive punishment by law if moral responsibility is not committed. But if we're talking about legal responsibility, it is a responsibility already governed by the government or any part of organization that needs to be done, and if not done, a punishment would take place to that particular individual for not doing his job.
Hi, I am Najwa Kistina, and I would like to talk about responsible professionals and ethical corporations. Okay, to understand the word of professional, it is necessary to know the meaning of the word profession. Okay, what is profession? Profession is the work that requires sophistication skill, the use of judgments and exercise of discretion. To be professional, he or she requires extensive formal education and not simply a training or appreciation. And there are societies or organizations that are controlled by the members of the profession who set the standards of conduct for the professionals and admissions to professions. Engineering itself is also a profession, okay? Certainly, engineering requires sophistication skills and particular knowledge that is obtained through extensive training, through formal education for about 4 years. Okay, we are engineering students, right? And plus, engineers design involve judgment of how to use available materials and components to resolve certain problems. If we consider discretion, then there is a need to keep the employers' and clients' information confidential. So, here the word profession is that you need a sophisticated training, not only the appreciation by the society. The responsible professional and ethical corporation is very much important. Okay, now we talk about professional responsibilities. An engineer has some responsibilities in his or her work, which is known as professional responsibilities. There are few points of important responsibility, such as confidentiality. In engineering, it is an engineer's obligation to keep the information of the employer and client confidential. Okay, for example, test result and data, unreleased product or design. What else? How the business is run. Those actually can be used by the competitor to gain advantages, and hence must be kept confidential in interest of the organization. The next point is conflict of interest. It is important for the profession to avoid such a situation. There may be conflict of interest between the engineer and the organization. Okay, the engineers may compromise the need of the public for one's own interest, and this may result into various accidents occurring during the engineering. Or you may say, for example, you may say design failure, taking bribes to give permission for the work that is not within the code of ethics, or it is illegal sharing the information of tender with the company are some examples of giving in to self-interest at the cost of public or organizational interest. The next point is environmental ethics. Engineers have partly contributed to these problems and are also doing research on how to counter them. For example, there are standards for minimum level of certain gases and chemicals that are released by the factories. As we know, there are some standards of the norms that among only the factory can release into the environment. But these standards are sometimes compromised to be able to carry out this responsibility fully. Engineers must take the help of physicians, biologists, and public health experts. It may be costly affair to carry out various tests and takes more time, but in the long run, the decision taken will be beneficial for the whole society. The last point is computer ethics. Within the increased use of computer in all the field, it requires a challenge of unethical use of it. Firstly, the computers can be used for robbery, crime, blackmailing, and so on. Usage gives the ease to the criminals. Secondly, there is a privacy used for the information about individual and organizational. Leak of such information of individual may lead to harassment in terms of repeated phone calls from the telecallers, or even harassment in terms of subtle teasing. Thirdly, hacking. Hacking is used to access the private information. As we know, this is a very recent problem now, that hacking is used to access the private information and change or destroy some important information, right? Okay, many organizations have developed the codes of ethics for computer use. There are guidelines for the ethical use of computers. So these are the 4 responsibilities that every engineer has to keep in mind while doing his or her authority. So we are moving on to the next topic, which is utilitarianism. In the mid-18th century, a British philosopher named Jeremy Bentham was born in England. Bentham published a long defense of utilitarianism called An Introduction of the Principles of Morals and Legislation in 1789. He believed in freedom of speech, abolition of slavery, women's rights, gay rights, and others. I mean, those are stuffs that some people do not even believe these days. He also found the idea of utilitarianism, which is the main principle being that the right action is the one that produces the most overall happiness. So some might think that this means in daily life in daily life, they can watch movies, smoke, eat donuts, go on holidays, all day, but that would be wrong as utilitarianism. As utilitarianism, people have differentiate two types of pleasure. So utilitarianism people have differentiate two types of pleasure, which are first, a higher pleasure, which is related to our intellect, and the other one is lower pleasure, which is related to our senses. So to put it into mathematical terms, it might look like total amount of happiness in all people plus the right action to get the most amount of people happy is equal to utilitarianism. Okay, what is utilitarianism? Okay, so basically utilitarianism is an ethical theory that determines right from wrong by focusing on outcomes. It can also be meant by actions that are morally permissible if and only if they produce at least as much net happiness as any other available action. In other words, the more happiness and less suffering that results from our actions, the better the action is, and the right action is the one that produces the greatest balance of happiness over suffering. It is kind of a form of consequentialism, which is consequentialism is whether an act is morally right depends on consequences. That is what consequentialism is meant by. Indeed, utilitarianism and consequentialism share many of the same principles. One difference, however, is consequentialism doesn't specify a desired outcome, while utilitarianism specifies good as the desired outcome. Okay, there are limitations of utilitarianism. First, we cannot predict the future. Hence, it is actually difficult to know with certainty whether the consequences of our actions will be good or bad. Secondly, utilitarianism has trouble accounting for values such as justice and individual rights. So, the action that you do that gives the most amount of people happiness is actually the best action you can do, which means you actually make sacrifices to your happiness in order to make other people around you happy, or other people, be it stranger or someone you know, happy. So it can mean sacrificing your pleasure in order to produce more good overall. For example, I'll give you an example, like when it is your birthday and your family says that you can choose any restaurant that you want, or any restaurant that you would like to be celebrated at. So the thing that would make you happiest actually is Thai food. You want to eat Thai food, but you know that that would make the rest of your family miserable, or you don't even know what they actually like. So when you choose Western food instead of Thai food, which is nobody's favorite actually, but everybody can make do. So you have thought that thing actually you have thought like a utilitarianism people. You have chosen the most you have chosen the action that would produce the most overall happiness for the group, even though it produces less happiness for you than other alternatives would have. Okay, in any given situation, you should choose the action that produces the greatest good for the greatest number, like I have talked previously. But sometimes the act that will produce the greatest good for the greatest number can actually seem just wrong. Okay, for instance, let's say I am a doctor and I have 6 patients, and that time I have only 5 doses left of some very in short supply medicines. Okay, so in an emergency situation, I am left with 6 patients and all of them need the drug to survive, but one of them will survive only if I give her all 5 doses of drug. The other 5 patients can survive on single dose each. Okay, what would you do? What would I do as a doctor? Right? Talking about utilitarianism. Utilitarianism will definitely tell us to divide up the drugs, saving the 5 patients and allowing the other patient that need 5 doses of drug to die. That might seem harsh, actually letting one to die, but remember that pain is pain, regardless of who is experiencing it. In fact, it is actually 5 times less bad than all 5 of their death. Okay, those I talked about previously is called act utilitarianism, or sometimes called classical utilitarianism. This is what the idea of utilitarianism is all about. Okay, doing actions that have a consequence that will do the best for the most people. That is act utilitarianism or classical utilitarianism. So thought experiments like those led some utilitarians or utilitarianism people to come up with another framework for their theory. This one is called rule utilitarianism. Okay, this version of theory says that we ought to live by rules that in general are likely to lead to the greatest good for the greatest number. So yes, there are going to be situations where killing an innocent people will lead to the greatest good for the greatest number, right? But utilitarians or rule utilitarianism people want us to think long term. Okay, rule utilitarians want us to think long term and on a larger scale. It allows us to refrain from acts that might maximize utility in the short run and instead follow rules that will maximize utility for the majority of the time.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Putra Muhammad Haikal Hakim bin Muhammad Safi'i from EH20006M. So I'll continue present the topic 2, which is 2.4, which is right ethics and duty ethics. So first I will continue with the right ethics. Right ethics are ethics that are most important to human rights. According to the right ethics theory, human right is the ultimate appeal and it should be respected. Human rights are entirely different from legal rights. Right ethics also provide the foundation for ethical requirement in engineering theory. And a few examples of human rights are such as freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and right to privacy. And also right ethics also applies to engineer, and in engineering code of ethics we give paramount importance to the safety, health, and welfare of the public. And some of the example for engineering codes of ethics, which is right not to be injured by dangerous product, right to privacy, right to receive benefit through a fair and honest exchange in a free marketplace. And also, as you know, the right ethics is classified into two, which are liberty and also the welfare rights. So as I mentioned before, the right ethics is classified into two, which is liberty and welfare. And for the liberty rights are the rights which, as the name suggests, other people should not interfere with your freedom. And that is the definition of the liberty rights. And after that, the welfare rights. Welfare rights are the rights with some benefit. It has nothing to do with our freedom. And however, between these two right ethics, which is I mentioned before, the liberty and welfare, many of the right ethics say that both of the liberty right and welfare right is important. John Locke was right ethics who focused on liberty right and thus called libertarian. So that is a few explanation about the right ethics, and I'll continue with the duty ethics. The definition of duty ethics is correlated with right ethics as well. Duty ethics reverse the order of priority by beginning with duties and deriving rights from them. Both duty and right develop as distinct moral and traditions. Duty ethics imply means that these ethics place a duty on others. As example, if we take right to live, in this right we have a right to live, but then we are placing a duty on others that they should not kill us. This duty placed on others is known as duty ethics. And this particular approach is known as the ontological approach. So in this approach, we ascertain certain duties and then derive some rights from it. The deontological approach says that duty is the base of the ethics, which is the duty ethics. So that's a few explanation about the right ethics and duty ethics, which is correlated to our engineering life. And then I will proceed the subtopic, which is the code ethics. In our engineering life, we have the code ethics engineering. So the definition of the code ethic is a code ethic is a set of principles and rules used by individuals and organizations to govern their decision-making process, as well as to distinguish right from wrong. They also provide a general idea of the ethical standards of a business or an organization. However, people can have their own personal codes of ethics as well. So basically, the code ethics is depends on the individuals and the organization in the engineering life. So in code ethics, every occupational groups that claim to have professional status has code of ethics. It means that every organization in the engineering life have their own codes of ethics. The engineer code of ethics represent the collective stance, and he shared the conviction of the fraternity of engineers. The code expressed the right, duties, and obligation of the members of the profession. And also the codes of ethics indicate to others that the profession is seriously concerned about the responsible professional conduct. So it actually depends on the any organization or company to have their own code of ethics to show that their company is very stable and professional. And the other point is the sensitivity of the code amounts to an honor pledge, which when breach brings shame and dishonor to both the transgressor and the profession. There is no legal enforcement, only self-respect and self-esteem, and the chosen inviolable value of life for someone belonging to a noble profession. So this means that the code of ethics have no restriction, and you can have your own code of ethics depending on your factory or the place of the company to show their professional in the engineering life. And if we don't respect ourselves, who would? That is the point and the bottom line. So in code of ethics, there's a few example of it, such as the first one is preamble, the second one is fundamental of canons, third is rules of practice, and the last one is professional obligation. So at first I will explain the first one of the example of the code of ethics that I mentioned before, which is preamble. Engineering is an important and learned profession, and we know that as members of this profession, engineers are expected to exhibit the highest standards of honesty and integrity. Engineering has a direct and vital impact on the quality of life for all people. Accordingly, the services provided by engineers require honesty, impartiality, fairness, and equity, and must be dedicated to the protection of the public health, safety, and welfare. Engineers must perform under a standard of professional behavior that requires adherence to the highest principle of ethical conduct. So basically, preamble is depending on the individuals to show their honesty and integrity to perform their their work in engineering life. And then I will proceed to the second example of the code of ethics in engineering. As an engineer, in the fulfillment of their professional duties, they should hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. Second one, we should perform services only in areas of their competence. The third is issue public statement only in an objective and truthful manners. Act for each employer or client as faithful agents or trustees. Avoid deceptive act. And lastly, conduct themselves honorably, responsibly, ethically, and lawfully so as to enhance the honor, reputation, and usefulness of the profession. So it means that we need to be professional. And so basically in fundamental canons, it is about how you being a professional engineer. It's about you in the workplace, and also the time that you're consulting with the clients about your project. And also it says about the honorably, responsibly, and ethically you when you enhance the honor and reputation and the usefulness of the profession that you take right now. Then I will proceed with the third examples of code of ethics in engineering, which is rules of practice. And in this part, I will giving you guys a few examples of the rules of practice. So the first one is engineers shall hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. So if engineers' judgment is overruled under circumstances that endanger life or property, they shall notify their employer or client and such other authority as may be appropriate. So it means that if some of an few accidents happen in the workplace, the engineer should inform the other person, such as employer or the client, to perform a next step in order to find the conclusion to do the next thing, and to avoid the disadvantage happen for the accident. And engineers shall approve only those engineering and documents that are in conformity with applicable standards. Engineers also shall not reveal fact, data, or information without prior consent of the client or employer, except as authorized or required by law of this code. This point is really important. If we are in the engineer life, we should not reveal especially the fact, data, or information, because it is actually privacy and confidential. And next is engineer shall not permit the use of their name or associate in business ventures with any person or firm that they believe is engaged in fraudulent or dishonest enterprise. Engineers should not aid or abet the unlawful practice of engineering by a person or firm. And the next thing is engineers having knowledge of any alleged violation of this code should report their want to appropriate professional bodies when relevant, also to public authorities, and cooperate with the proper authorities in furnishing such an information or assistance as may be required. So, as the examples given, which is engineers should hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public, it means that you need to have your own privacy, and to make your company like professional things, especially with the data and fact that is ongoing with the project. And the next examples that I can give the rule of practice is engineers should perform services only in the areas of their competence. Engineers should undertake the assignments only when qualified by education or experience in the specific technical field involved. Engineers should not affix their signatures to any plan or document dealing with subject matter in which they lack competence, nor to any plan or document not prepared under their direction and control. It means that the signatures of the engineers need to be strictly to one plan at one time. So as a professional engineers, you cannot duplicate the signatures of the other engineers in order to steal the plan or document that have been done to the other engineers. And engineers may accept assignments and assume responsibility for coordination of an entire project, and sign and seal the engineering documents for the entire project, provide that each technical segment is signed and sealed only by the qualified engineers who prepared the segment. So it means that as a professional engineers, we need to declare which one is the qualified engineers who prepare the segment, so we can deal and sign the documents with the certain people who are actually qualified and not the others random engineers. And then I move to the last examples of this part, which I can state that engineers should issue public statements only in an objective and truthful manner. And as an engineer, they should be objective and truthful in professional reports, statements, or testimony. They should include all relevant and pertinent information in such report, statements, or testimony, which should bear the date indicating when it was current. It means that when you ongoing with a project that currently doing, the information such as report, statements, or the testimony which is included in the agreement of the project should be indicate the time when it was currently due. And engineers may express publicity technical opinion that are founded upon knowledge of the fact and the competence in the subject matter. Engineers also shall issue no statement, criticism, or argument on technical matters that are inspired or paid for by interested parties unless they have prefaced their comments by explicitly identifying the interested parties on whose behalf they are speaking, and by revealing the existence of any interest engineers may have in the matters. So in this point, as an professional engineers, you should not critique or giving a argument to the other engineers which is not involved by your point. So you can be the third party, but in manners you could not interpret to the other engineer's point, which actually not in the same head as you, but maybe in the discussion of the project ongoing, you can discuss and talk in manners in order to find the one words that you guys maybe in order to have a good project of plan. So the next examples of code of ethics in engineering, which is also the last one, is professional obligation. In this part as well, I'll give you guys a few of the examples which is related to the professional obligation in an engineering life. So the first one is engineers should be guided in all their relations by the highest standard of honesty and integrity. So actually, if you guys be concerned, I always highlight the honesty and integrity. So basically, honesty and integrity is the important of you being a good engineers in order for you to be a professional engineers in the future. So engineers should have to acknowledge their errors and shall not distort or alter the fact. Engineers should advise their client or employers when they believe a project will not be successful. This part is you being the honest one. Like if you think that this kind of project cannot be going in the future, then you should advise the clients or the employers in the manners saying that this project will not be successful because it maybe have a distracted or the disadvantage of you being while they are doing the project in order of the course also maybe it's about the safety as well. So engineers should not accept outside employment to the detriment of their regular work or interests. Before accepting any outside engineering employment, they will notify their employers. So in this point, as an engineers, we should not accept the third party of employment who want to join with the project, which actually is not in the agreement before. So if they like you still need the third party of the employment, you need to notify the employer and the client as well. The next is engineers should not attempt to attract an engineer from another employer by false or misleading pretense. The next is engineers should not promote their own interests at the expense of the dignity and integrity of the profession. This is regarding for you. In order for you to be a professional engineer, you should not show your own interest of the expenses regarding to the project that you are ongoing. So it's actually need to be private and confidential by your own self or maybe the person that you're close to. And the next is engineers should treat all persons with dignity, respect, fairness, and without discrimination. This is basically about the humanity as well. If you've been the engineers, you should have the dignity and respect to others in order for you to consult or giving the advice as well without this discrimination, because we live in Malaysia as well. As I mentioned, I'll mention in Malaysia we have a lot of races here, so there is no discrimination of races in you being an engineer in the future or right now. So that was the explanation of the examples. Before I'll move to the next examples that is related to the professional obligation, which is engineers should at all times strive to serve the public interest. Engineers are encouraged to participate in civic affairs, which is career guidance for youth, and work for the advancement of the safety, health, and well-being of their community. Engineers should not complete, sign, or seal plans or specifications that are not in conformity with applicable engineer standards. If the client or employer insists on such as unprofessional conduct, they shall notify the proper authorities and withdraw from further service on the project. So it means that you as an engineer should not complete or sign or even seal the plans to the other agreement or specification in order for you to confirm the applicable engineering standard, because we communicate with the client or employer, and the client and employer as well have the authorities or the owner to withdraw from the project that you are ongoing or you are conducting right now. So engineers are encouraged to extend public knowledge and appreciation of engineers and its achievement. Engineers are also encouraged to adhere to the principle of sustainable development in order to protect the environment for future generation. And also the engineers should continue their professional development throughout their careers and should keep current in their specialty fields by engaging in professional practice, participating in continuing educating courses, reading in the technical literature, and attending professional meeting and seminar. So, in order for you, being a professional engineers, as a professional engineers, they actually still studying in order to be a more good engineers in the future, such as they maybe go to the seminar or reading the technical literature and attending professional meeting. It depends on the engineers in the future. If you guys want to be more successful, then you can be, it's your choice to be to develop yourself in the future. And then I will move to the next point, an example of the public obligation, which is engineers should avoid all conduct or practice that deceive the public. Engineers should avoid the use of statement containing a material misrepresentation of fact or omitting a material fact. Consisting the foregoing, engineers may advertise or for recruitment for personnel. Consistent with the foregoing, engineers may also be prepared articles for the lay or technical press, but such articles should not imply credit to the author for work performed by others. So it means that as an engineers, you should not reveal the containing of the material misrepresentation to the public, such as the media social one, or even by doing the press conference, because it is actually private and confidential, which involve the client, employer, and also the employee as well.
Assalamualaikum, my name is Nurul Atira binti Abdul Halim, and I will be explaining about self-realization and self-interest. First of all, self-realization gives greater prominence to self-interest and personal commitments to pursue self-fulfillment. Personal commitments, on the other hand, will form the core of a person's character that can motivate, guide, and give meaning to the work of engineers. Community-oriented version of self-realization means that one pursue self-realization, but at the same time, they are enriching their community. Next is ethical egoism. In philosophy, an ethical theory according to which moral decision-making should be guided entirely by self-interest. Ethical egoism is often contrasted with psychological egoism, which is the empirical claim that advancing one's self-interest is the underlying motive of all human action. One great advantage of ethical egoism compared to other normative theories is that it avoids any possible conflict that may happen between self-interest and morality. Another one is that it makes moral behavior, by definition, more rational. This advantage is based on the assumption that it is rational to pursue one's own interests. Next, moving on to the predominant egoism. Predominant egoism has two crucial principles. First, their self-interested concerns tend to override their other regarding idealistic and altruistic motives in determining their actions. But this principle is until people have attained a desirable level of security and individual welfare. Second principle is the extent to which individuals perform actions and behaviors which are significantly against their own interests is usually quite limited. So people often will perform such actions only on behalf of family members, close friends, or institutions or projects with which they feel a strong personal connection. So clearly, altruistic actions which only benefit complete strangers are extremely rare. Moving on, I will explain on the relation between engineers and engineering companies. First, for the engineers have three motives, which is the first one is proficiency motives. This includes to challenge themselves and to serve for the public. As for the compensation motives, engineers will make money for self or family, but at the same time, he will help the community. And for the third one, which is the moral motives, it has the engineer has the desire to do right and has the integrity and will feel good and positively impacts community. Meanwhile, for the engineering companies, it includes safety or profit motives, which includes the company competence and education. The next one is the professional climate, which includes compensation. This means that in regards to the professional climate, in regards to any climates happening, the engineering companies will provide compensation to whoever is affected by the climate problem. The next subtopic is about workplace rights and responsibilities, which includes teamwork. So teamwork is in definition is working in a group which effectively requires the virtues of loyalty to employers and organizations, collegiality, respect for authority, and contributing to the ethical climate within the organization. Teamwork also involves respects for the rights of other employees or colleagues who work together with the engineers to achieve common goals. The second category, which falls under workplace rights and responsibilities, is confidentiality. There are some information which will directly affect the company's ability to compete in the marketplace. Such information are very important and very crucial and can be used by competitors to gain advantage or to catch up if the competitors were to know about the information. So what types of crucial and important information that should be kept confidential? We have two types of informations, which is the first one is the obvious information. This includes tests and results data. Information about second is information about upcoming unrealized data, and the third one is the design or formulas of products. For the second type of information is the non-obvious information, which includes business information, such as the number of employees working on a project, identity suppliers, production costs, and production yields. This is the non-obvious information because it is like a common fact that the companies in the same field will get to know. Hence, this is why most companies have very strict policies regarding the disclosure of business information and require all employees to sign the agreement. And this is also why engineers that are working for a client are frequently required to sign a non-disclosure agreement. And to add, the engineers working for the government, especially in the defense industry, have more stringent requirement about secrecy and may have required security clearance to be granted after investigation by governmental security agency before being able to work. How long does the confidentiality extend after an engineer leaves employment with a company? So, companies have the right to keep information away from their competitors. And second, the burden of ensuring that both of these competing interests are recognized and maintained lies with the individual engineer. And a legal engineer is required to keep information even after he has moved to a new employer in the same technical area. The third category is the conflict of interest. This responsibility will arise when an interest which, if pursued, could keep a professional from meeting one of his obligations. For example, a civil engineer working for a state department of highways might have a financial interest in a company that has a bid on a construction project. The engineering codes for this type of responsibility are very clear on the need to avoid any conflict of interest, like the example I mentioned. So, there are three types of conflict of interest. The first one is the actual conflict of interest. This is the same as the civil engineer example I mentioned just now. And then the potential conflict of interest. But this type of conflict may be threatened easily to become actual conflict. For example, an engineer might find himself becoming friends with a supplier for his company, and there is a potential that the engineer judgment might be conflicted by the need to maintain friendship. Okay, so this tends to become the actual conflict of interest. And the third one is the appearance of a conflict of interest. And this type of conflict occurs when an engineer is paid based on a percentage of the cost of the design. So how to avoid conflict of interest? First, you can follow the company policy, the guidance of a company policy. And second, you can ask for second opinions from co-workers or colleagues or managers to make the situation clear that there is nothing to hide. Third is you can use ethical problem-solving techniques. And last one is you can look in the professional ethics codes that clearly forbid conflicts of interest. The fourth and the last category under the workplace rights and responsibilities is whistleblowing. So whistleblowing is first defined in the Concise Oxford Dictionary, the 10th edition, as a person who informs on someone engaged in an illicit activity. The implementation of whistleblowing policies in the public or private sectors ensures that a good early warning system is in place, which allows the organization to be alerted of any corruption, fraud, or other wrongdoings which may be taking place. This will provide the organization the opportunity to take steps to eradicate the illicit activity before any irreplaceable damage happens. And more often, it is the employees of an organization who are the ones with inside information on improper conduct by their employers or their colleagues in the workplace. These employees are then faced with the dilemma as to whether or not they should blow the whistle on their employers or their colleagues. This statement means that usually the worker inside the company has the information on the misconduct, but they are facing second thoughts on whether or not they should report the incident, about the information to the authorities, because they might be faced with penalty or any workplace bully. In Malaysia, whistleblowers are protected. The Malaysian Parliament has introduced legal protection for whistleblowers, in particular officers and auditors of a company. In Companies Act 1965, Sections 1748B, 368B2, and 368B3, and the Capital Markets and Services Act 2007, Section 3202, in its attempt to counter malpractices and fraud by companies. Next, we have the Whistleblower Protection Act 2010, which is called WPA, which is introduced on 15th of December 2010, which introduced the employment-specific criminal liability for retaliatory or detrimental action taken by an employer against a whistleblower who has disclosed the improper conduct of their employer or colleagues. The WPA defines a whistleblower as a person who makes a disclosure of improper conduct to an enforcement agency based on his reasonable belief that any other person has engaged, is engaging, or is preparing to engage in improper conduct, provided that such disclosure is not specifically prohibited by any written law. And under the WPA, improper conduct means that any conduct which, if proven, constitutes a disciplinary offense or a criminal offense. It is important to emphasize that in order to be entitled to the safeguards under the WPA, the particular whistleblower must disclose the information on the improper conduct to an enforcement agency. The enforcement agency under the WPA under the definition in WPA includes any ministry, department, agency, or other body set up by the federal government of Malaysia, state governments, or local governments. So, if a whistleblower who makes the disclosure to his employer or to the media or to any other third-party person will not be entitled to the protection under the WPA, as the WPA has stated that the whistleblower needs to disclose the information only to the enforcement agency, which I mentioned earlier. And his remedies for any detrimental action inflicted upon him by his employer would be under the employment or contract law. This means that if the whistleblower is to reveal the misconduct to other third-party person other than enforcement agency, the whistleblower might be faced with losing his job or will be faced penalties by the company. How to protect the whistleblower? So, the WPA has stated 3 forms of protection on the said whistleblower. The first one is the identity of the whistleblower and the person against whom a disclosure is made, as well as the information disclosed by a whistleblower, is to be kept confidential by any recipient of such information. The person who hears about this means that the person who hears about the misconduct that the whistleblower is telling, and about the person who is against the whistleblower must keep quiet and not to tell anybody about their identities. Second, a whistleblower is conferred immunity from any civil or criminal liability. This includes liability from administrative or disciplinary proceedings for making a disclosure of improper conduct. The third one is a whistleblower is protected against detrimental action in reprisal for a disclosure of improper conduct made by him. Detrimental action are actions that include causes that includes injuries, loss or damage, intimidation or harassment, discrimination, demotion, suspension, termination or adverse treatment in relation to his employment, as well as a threat of any of the above mentioned actions. The burden is on the employer to show that any detrimental action taken against a whistleblower is not taken as a result of the disclosure of improper conduct by the latter. It is noteworthy that a person who commits a detrimental action against a whistleblower or any person related to or associated with a whistleblower in reprisal for a disclosure of improper conduct can now be held personally liable for damages or compensation. Now, while the phrase reasonable belief is not defined in the WPA, the Court of Appeal in the UK case of Babula versus Waltham Forest College in 2007, IRLR 346, held that for an employee to be protected against detriment or dismissal on the grounds of making a protected disclosure under whistleblowing provisions, it will be sufficient for the employee to reasonably believe that the employer is in breach of a legal obligation, whether or not such belief turns out to be wrong. So that's all from me and from my group. Thank you.